Yo guys, I'm going to be going over a quick video today on how to identify supply and demand, and I'm not going to go like too deep into this. I'm going to be telling you guys what I know and what I've seen works. So basically supply and demand is when it's basically when there's a huge move, and because of that huge move there's going to be unfilled buy orders or unfilled sell orders depending if it's a demand or supply zone. And that's the key. That's like really key to know, because if you see it come back down to zone and it doesn't wick right off, then that's not really a true demand zone, because there weren't really unfilled buy orders waiting to get filled from the first move. So that tells me that the first move wasn't significant enough, or there wasn't enough volume or whatnot like supporting that move, right? So that's just one thing you remember. And you have to, so demand zones are kind of like support, and supply zones are kind of like resistance, but they're more zones. If that makes sense. So let me show you guys a demand zone. So a demand zone would be where you see like a huge move, or like a bunch of green candles in a row. Like they have to be big green candles, like these kind of candles. So starting right here, this would be our first demand zone. And so you would draw the there's a lot of ways to draw. There's not one specific way, but the way I do it is I draw it from the low of the wick on whatever candle, whatever like the bottom candle was, and then I kind of just draw it to the end of the first green candle. Or say this candle was like went up to here, I just kind of draw it like halfway through maybe. It all depends. There's a lot of different ways to draw them, but like this is an ideal way you could draw them. And let me just make this green to represent a demand zone. Usually I like to make my demand zones green, and I like to make my supply zones red. So this is the demand zone. Let me switch this around actually, just so we get that nice big green line in the bottom. Okay, so this is the demand zone, and if the price were to come back down here, I guarantee you it would, because of how big a move this was, I guarantee you it probably wicked down here and bounced right off. So it's very important, even though you don't see this being used yet. Like if SPY comes all the way down here, it would be really good to have this zone down here. And there's supply and demand zones at different time frames. So this is a 5-minute time frame. So you could label this 5-minute demand zone, and so you could just go to text and you could just write 5-minute demand zone, or you could just obviously remember that obviously, but yeah, so it's really good to keep the zone here. And as you can see, this was actually a previous support line as well, so it goes hand in hand with support from right here. So do you see how this is a support line? And then this was also a support line. So under this level, I'd be very bearish, but you got to realize that these demand zones and support go hand in hand, but demand zones are drawn after a big move. So let's go in like a higher time frame. The best time frame you can probably draw supply and demand is either the daily, 4-hour, or 1 hour. And I always draw supply and demand on the 1 hour chart before the market opens. So if we look at this, do you see how that 5-minute zone I just drew was a demand zone? You can literally see. Do you see how this line I just drew in the other time frame is still here? This is still a demand zone on the 1 hour. So because it made this huge move off this big candle, this would be the 1 hour demand zone as well as a 5-minute demand zone. And it's always a good sign when you see the same demand zone on multiple different time frames. And I bet you if you went to the 15-minute, 1 hour, whatever it may be, this would still be a demand zone, right? So this is a very significant demand zone. As you can see, we just broke the previous high right here. We just broke the previous high. So that tells me we will either retrace a little bit, and if we do retrace all the way down here, if I had to guess, we would probably bounce off here. So this is a place you'd want to scale on calls because of this big move. So let's go a little over here maybe for another demand zone. Okay, so this is an example. See how big this candle is? That's a clear demand zone even without seeing all this stuff, right? So I'm going to draw a demand zone starting from the bottom. kind of like halfway through that red candle right there. It doesn't have to be perfect. but just make sure it's big enough zone so like you can easily scale into calls. So we see this big candle, right? And then we see a giant shooter. And look what happens. Look what happens after this giant shooter, if I can zoom into it. It wicks down this day. Look at all these unfilled buy orders that got wicked right up. So many unfilled orders got wicked right up that the next time it came, there weren't as many orders right here. And we actually gapped up that day. I'm guessing we gapped up probably because of news or something. But after the first leg of unfilled orders got filled here, you can see it's way weaker here. So that's also something to keep in mind. I like playing demand zones off the first bounce. Usually the second and third are a lot more risky. But yeah, and now that these unfilled orders are gone, this is still technically a demand zone, but it's not a demand zone because they're unfilled orders. It's more of a support zone. And it turns into a support zone because people saw that institutions, who buy demand zones, institutions you'd buy demand zones, you want to remember that, they saw that they'll buy down here. So next time it came this low, we saw a bunch of buyers step in. So that's very important to take into account. This eventually turns into a support zone once all these unfilled orders are filled. So you always want to, so basically you just need to remember, just look for the big giant candles to draw demand zones off of. I would argue that this is the demand zone right down here. So I bet you if it came below the zone, I bet you it would have bounced off there maybe. But yeah. Okay, so a supply zone is just the opposite. So supply zones are basically resistance, but it's where it sells off very, very fast. So one supply zone that I already can kind of technically see is right here. Do you see all these giant big red candles? These are huge. This is where I would draw my first supply zone right here, and you can tell it's a little bit of a resistance too. So if you see a supply zone that matches up with kind of a resistance as well, that's a very good supply zone, because you see how it keeps rejecting this kind of level. Where is it? Around 458, which is also a psych level. I don't know why the line drew there, but you can see that this line is clearly respected. And then after you see this giant red candle, there's where I'd probably draw the supply zone. If I saw this candle and this candle, I probably wouldn't draw the supply zone yet. I would probably draw it after I saw this candle. And your point is not to play the supply zone the first time you see it, because you won't know it's a supply zone until it happens, right? So you don't want to play it the first time that you actually see it. And because like you're obviously going to be chasing, and your risk to reward is going to be way skewed. So I would argue that you would draw the supply zone right here. Let me actually do this. So I would argue that you'd start right here. And I didn't even look at these points. I just drew it from this top of the wick to like half of this candle, right? So we make a W pattern, which is a harmonic. And as soon as you get here, you don't see a bunch of unfilled orders until right here. Do you see this candle? Do you see how it wicks up right to the zone? That's where you get all the unfilled orders. And you could probably even make this down a little more, but you can see all the unfilled orders right here, and there weren't enough unfilled orders, so it didn't shoot right back down, which like would scare me. That shows you that buyers are actually stepping in. And because this is SPY, and SPY is very, very bullish, and it's like long-term bullish, you're gonna have to get really bad news to reject very, very hard off a supply zone. So we get unfilled orders here, we have unfilled orders that are filled here, and then we start seeing those unfilled orders that kind of lose volume. So we see all this green buying volume into the zone, but it's not as much as volume as like this candle or this candle or this like right here. So you have to keep in account this is kind of low volume. And after this doji, you could have, so this is the thing. So we gapped down overnight, and I don't hold overnight. So unless you're playing futures, you could have went short here or scaled in maybe around this point with a stop loss above the supply zone, which would be above this point right here. So you could have scaled into this with a stop loss off here, but you're also risking up a gap up overnight. But clearly we didn't get that, and this is actually the first rejection. And then we come up, we reject again, And now because there's the unfilled orders are already filled over here, there's not really unfilled orders over here, but it's still more of a resistance zone now. It kind of turns into a resistance zone from a supply zone. And then we get a giant rejection candle, and immediately after this candle, I would probably think about taking puts. Or I wouldn't think about taking puts for like swinging, because I don't swing puts on SPY because of my account size, but it would definitely give me a bearish bias that we rejected this hard off supply zone, right? So that's something important to take into account. And it's important to have like your label. So I would label this a 1 hour supply zone, and I would go in the 5 minute, see if it matches up with any points that it's rejecting. So that's important to know. And like supply and demand, like resistance and support, they're interchangeable. So supply can turn into demand, and demand can turn into supply. But after a while, it actually just becomes a support and resistance zone because all those unfilled orders were already filled. So if we move this over here, you can see this isn't the greatest example, and I didn't plan. I don't want to be that guy on YouTube who just like shows you guys the most perfect examples. Oh, this always works, because it doesn't work. There's no strategy that always works, right? So this isn't the most perfect example, but you can see that it bounced up off the zone, it gapped up over, and it kind of retested, bounced again, and then fell through again, and then rejected again. So that's after this candle, I probably would have been pretty bearish for the short time being. So I still have the supply zone on. I'm not taking this off. Only take off your zones when they aren't really respected. This was respected well enough, in my opinion, to see like if we go up here again, I can definitely expect a rejection. And as you guys can see, we actually just broke a huge resistance. Let's see if I can even draw this. We just broke a huge downtrend after this candle, and then we retested. So that's kind of nice. But remember, supply can turn demand, demand can turn into supply. So like, say the price fell through here, and say SPY was this low, it could come up, and I guarantee you this would be a very important resistance point. Let me see if I can find maybe an example for you, maybe on the 90-minute chart. Let's see. So if we go back a little bit, okay, so right here, so right here we see this is the demand zone at first. Right here, it bounces off, and then these unfilled orders get filled right here, bounces off again, gaps down, and kind of holds in the zone, and then it shoots right back down. And after these giant red candles, that's when I would consider this a supply zone from previous demand. And then look, it literally comes up, retests this, and gets rejected. And I believe this is just the zone I had on the other time frame, but I couldn't see back this far, so I didn't realize that. But this was an old demand zone that is now a supply zone over here, right? So yeah, that's very important to remember. So yeah, that's a basic video on supply and demand. There's more into it. There's more, like, it's important that you understand this is where institutions buy, like this is where big money buys. And this won't work 100% of the time, because these zones after a lot of time will obviously get weaker and weaker the more they're retested. So you have to understand that. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I am using TrendSpider right now. If you want to download TrendSpider, there's a it's a very, very, very good charting platform in my opinion. You can backtest strategies, you can do a bunch of stuff, and I'm gonna be making some strategies on here for you guys who do download it, and I'm gonna be making a watch list as well. I'm actually doing another watch list video next video. So if you want to download this, my referral code is in the description. It's a great platform. Let me know if you have any questions about it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to use my Webull referral code if this helped you. You don't have to, obviously, it's in the description as well. But yeah, thanks you guys for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.